So let's talk about file management. Yeah, I know it's really mundane and not exciting or creative at all, but I do think it's important, and honestly, I kind of like it. I don't know what it is, but seeing really well managed files, it's just satisfying. I know file management doesn't seem like something that's very important, especially as a creative, but whenever you work on a computer all day, every day, and you're constantly looking for files or storing files, it can be really useful to have a system that works for you. But I think it's important to have a file system that works for you, so that way you can be more effective in creating and you don't have to worry about, where did I put this file? Where did I last see that thing? What project was it in? Where was it at? You already know where all of that is. So in a minute, I'm gonna go through the system that I use, so that way you can change it and adapt it to suit your needs. Before I do that, I wanna go over the 2 rules that I have for file management. Number 1 being that every file needs to have a place. If you think about files like drawers in a kitchen, typically, you're gonna have one for silverware. If you open up a cabinet, there's one for bowls, there's one for cups. Everything has its place, but things start to get haywire whenever you have a drawer that you just start throwing random stuff in. And that's whenever you start losing things or not knowing where to find it, because you just threw it in the junk drawer and now it's just lost in there, and you're gonna have to search through a bunch of crap in order to find it, or hope that it's in there where you thought it was. But if you had a dedicated place, you would know exactly where the thing is that you're looking for it. So once again, every file needs a place. Now the second rule I have is that if you were to give your files to someone else, they should be able to find what they're looking for. So let's just say you were working for a company, you're on a project, you're doing the project, and then you get sick one day. And so the company takes that project and gives it to someone else to finish. Now the person should be able to open up your folder and then understand where to find whatever it is they're looking for. If someone has to guess or look through a bunch of folders in order to find whatever they're looking for, you're probably not managing your files right. So with those 2 rules in mind, let me show you what my folder system is. So I went ahead and recreated my folder system in Illustrator. I thought that might be a little bit easier to see rather than in File Explorer. So before we get into this, I want to preface this by saying the system that I have works specifically for me. So what I mean by that is whenever I created this folder system, it was supposed to be used for ongoing clients. Clients that I'd be doing work for multiple times a year or over multiple years. You can still use this system if you want, but I just wanted to let you know so that way you kind of know what my frame of reference is whenever I'm looking at these folders and how I organized everything. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. So first off, I just have a folder that has all of my clients in it. It's pretty self-explanatory. It just has all of the work that I'm doing for whoever I'm doing it for. Now from there, each individual client gets their own folder. Nothing crazy there, pretty self-explanatory. Now here's where my own system starts to come into play. So the first folder that I have is a client info or a client's asset folder. So any kind of documents that I'm given or any kind of assets that I'm given from a company will go in this folder. So that might be things like a brand guide, brand logos, brand colors, or if I have some kind of onboarding process with some documents, I'd put them all in here, so if I ever need to reference something, it's right there. This also might be somewhere where you want to keep contracts or something like that. So anything with a client that doesn't necessarily fall under the category of a project might end up going here. So that mainly takes care of the info part, but what about the assets part? So I also might keep logos, animations, and things that I'm going to reuse over multiple projects in this folder. So let's say I have multiple projects for a company spanning over multiple years. I could take that logo and copy it into each individual project folder, but then it's just redundant. It's just wasting space because I could have just put that logo in one folder that all of those projects are referring to. So this folder is just to combat that redundancy. Now the next folder is year. And as you would imagine, that's just so I know what year the project was done in. This just helps me break up my projects so that way I'm not looking through one folder that has 100 different projects. But really that covers it for these 2 folders. Now this level of my system is where things start to get a little bit more detailed. As you can see, I mentioned this earlier, but I have my client assets folder and my client's documents folder. So even those 2 are split up, so that way if I need to access a document, I have that folder. If I need to access a logo or animation, I have another folder for it. And while I didn't reference it here, you could also expand on that by having a logo folder, a animations folder, a brand guide folder. Really you can keep going and get more detailed depending on your needs. But let's move on to the year folder. What I put inside of those are individual projects that happened during that year. It's pretty simple and straightforward, nothing really crazy here. This just helps me break up all of my projects, so that way if I'm working on multiple projects at the same time, or if I need to go back to a project later on in the future, I know exactly where to find everything. Everything is labeled with the project name, so I can just find the files that are associated with it. But I also want to point out that I add a date in to any of the projects that I'm working on. So my file system is project name _ date. This is a little redundant, but it does help me be able to kind of visualize some of the key differences in my folders. This is especially so if for whatever reason you are working on projects that have the same name but were done at different times. I would say that's a rare occurrence, but it is nice to have that distinction and that you can see it really easily without having to get into the metadata. That's pretty much it for this part, so let's move on to the next one. So in each project folder, I have another set of folders for each part of the project, and those sections being video production, graphic design, and photography. But you could add on to this if you wanted to. If you were doing a podcast and you weren't going to worry about video or graphic design, you could add a audio folder. This just helps me further break down the project. So if I'm working on a video, I know exactly where to find all of the footage that I shot. But if I'm working on, let's say, the thumbnail for that video, I know that's going to be in the graphic design folder, so I don't have to go looking through a bunch of other files in order to find it. Every part of the project and every file has its own place. Something I also do is I number the folders. So as you can see, it starts off with 01 video production, and then it's 02 photography, and then it's 03 graphic design. So this helps me in two ways. One, it gives me a visual to look for. So if I associate the number 1 with video production, I already know where to go. But also, since it's numbered, I can control the order that they go in. So let's say for you, you don't do a lot of video production, but you do it sometimes. So maybe you make that the 3rd and it goes straight to the bottom, but graphic design is the thing that you do the most. So you name it number 1 and it goes right to the top. Just makes things a little bit cleaner and easier to find wherever you're looking for. That way you don't actually have to look at the name of the folder. You just know that video production is the one at the very top. And no matter what you do, it's always going to be at the very top. So you don't even have to read the folder, you just know where it's at. Now we're going to get even more detailed, but I'm going to start with the video production folder first, and then I'm going to show you my graphic design folder. So this is the folder system that I have for my video production projects. Once again, everything has a place. Everything that I shoot gets put in the footage folder, and the audio that I capture goes in the audio. If I'm using motion graphics or overlays, that can go in the assets. Of course, if I'm using any project files, those also have a place. And then of course, all of my exports have a folder for themselves. And while I don't show them here, some of these folders actually have even more folders inside of them. Just to give you an example, I sometimes shoot with 2 different cameras. So in order to differentiate the footage, I have a camera 1 folder and a camera 2 folder. One for my A cam and one for my B cam. And on top of that, I also have one for screen recording. So whenever I do something like this where I'm recording my screen, that also has a place. Another example is the assets folder that I have. I have folders for photography, motion graphics, FX, SFX, overlays. Like I said, everything has a place, so if there's something that I'm using in a project, it has a place to go. That way, if I'm ever looking for it in the future, I know exactly where it is. So that covers my video production folder, so let me show you my graphic design folder. Now, my graphic design folder isn't much different than my video production one. The main one being is that I have 3 different project folders. One for Illustrator files, one for Photoshop files, and one for InDesign files. So just to give you an example, let's say I'm working on a logo for a client. I know that I was working on an Illustrator, so I know exactly where it's going to be. But let's also say that I wanted to do a mock-up for that logo, so I might be using a Photoshop file. So in that case, as you guessed it, that's going to be in the Photoshop folder. This just helps me filter out everything, so that way I'm not looking in one big project folder with a bunch of different projects. I know exactly where to find the project that I need for the program that I'm using. So other than the project folders, I then have the assets folder. Now, as you guessed it, this is for any extra kind of things that I'm using for a project. So let's just say I downloaded an icon to use in a design that I was using. Or maybe I wanted to have a certain kind of texture over top an image that I was working on. Or maybe I needed to use some photography along with the design that I was making. My assets folder acts as a bin to put all of those in. This is especially useful because if I end up moving this folder somewhere else, all of the assets that I used for those designs are with them. Something that I've seen happen to other people before is they download something, they leave it in the downloads folder, they move the folder, and then they download it a year later, and what do you know? All of the link folders are broken. This gets rid of that risk by keeping everything in one place. And then lastly, as you would expect, I have an exports folder. And let me also add some advice for whenever you're naming your exports. Believe me, I know what it's like to be in your shoes whenever you have final logo version 1.2.3. Please, oh God, please let this be the final version. That happened to me so many times that I just got tired of trying to look through every single individual file, looking for the one that was actually the final one. So I do two things to remedy this. Number one, I number every single export. Let's say I'm working on a logo for a client and I export it to show to them. I would export that logo as 01_logo. And then the next day they come back to me and say, hey, we want to make some changes. So whenever I make those changes and then I export it again, it would be 02_logo. That way, if I'm ever looking for the actual final logo, I know it's the last number. And another thing you could also do is add on a date afterwards. So the file could look like 03_logo_date. This can also be useful because then you can see how many versions you've made in a single day. And maybe it's not necessary, but it can come in handy sometimes. So this is my file system. This is what I use every single day for every single project. So whenever I made this system, I tried my best to adhere to the two rules. Make sure everything has its place and make sure that someone could find a folder easily if they were ever looking for it. Like I said earlier in the video, please feel free to take this system and use it for your own. You're also free to change it and adapt it to whatever suits your needs. Really, just think of this folder system as a starting point. You're probably doing different work for me and you probably have a different way of organizing things, so just make a system that works for you. But I'm also interested to know if you have your own folder system. Maybe you have a system that's even better than mine, and honestly, I'd love to hear about it. So leave me a comment and tell me about your system. Now, I know this video wasn't the most exciting, but I do hope it was helpful. And if it was helpful, I'd appreciate it if you would check out the rest of my channel and then consider subscribing. I hope to see you in the next video.